Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Friends, we are back in Murray, Kentucky with attorney Jeff Roberts, and today we're going to talk about factory accidents and injuries. Jeff, good to see you again, guy.
Good to see you, Jim.
Absolutely. Hey, let's jump into this because I know you do a lot of work with factory workers who have been injured on the job. And, the types of injuries they sustain can be minor all the way up to very serious and catastrophic. So let's kind of go through some of those so that people kind of have an idea of what Kentucky Workers' Comp does for them and how they can go about that. And are these covered to begin with, right?
Yes, and you're correct. In a factory setting, you can have injuries as minor as some minor cuts and scrapes, and unfortunately, I've had cases all the way up to where the person had a fatal injury on the job site. So it can run a wide gamut from that standpoint. From there, a lot of what you see in factories, you can have a different variety of causes for the injury and obviously different body parts. A lot of times, depending on the type of factory and the type of weights that are being lifted in the factory, you see people who are in the shipping department having to lift weights, heavier things, and items like that suffer a lot of low back injuries. When people lift, you put a lot of strain on on your spine and your low back in that setting. And I've represented a lot of people in my career over the last 30 years who've suffered significant low back injuries because of the lifting, the heavy weights they were lifting at work.
And a lot of times, if you hear that pop, something's happened. And you can have a slipped disc, a herniated disc. That's going to be painful as heck, and that's going to take a long time in terms of rehab. But Kentucky Workers' Comp covers that, and there's a whole process for that, and you get some time off work, obviously, to heal. But I think you've said in previous episodes, go through that entire regimen. You need to heal properly, because if you rush it trying to get back, you can actually cause yourself additional injuries down the road.
Certainly, the potential is there from doing that. If you are injured with the low back, sometimes you do have a pop, you feel that, or you have just a sharp pain, and it may not last for very long, and then a day or two later, you have the ache that just continues to get worse. But you have some that, it's a sharp pain that stays from then on until they get treatment and recover from that. So you can have a variety of different settings on how the pain kind of generates and develops from that. But, the first thing to do is get prompt medical treatment, because that can make a difference on not only the outcome, but how extensive your medical treatment can be in the future as well. And, lifting injury that hurts the low back, it can be strained muscles in the low back, or it could be a herniated disc or a pinched nerve of some sort that's causing the pain from there. And you're not going to know on your own what's causing the pain. That's the reason you need to go see a doctor or medical professional and let them evaluate you. And frankly, you're probably going to get regardless of what's going on from a anatomical standpoint to cause the pain. Generally, the treatment's going to be very similar. To start with, you're going to get some anti-inflammatory medication, maybe a muscle relaxer, maybe a pain reliever, and have physical therapy treatment, things like that. And hopefully that will resolve your problem. If that doesn't resolve your problem, then they start looking at doing, further diagnostics, MRIs, CAT scans to try to give a better determination of what's causing the pain that you're having.
And obviously that could lead to surgery or multiple surgeries, which is, I hate to say worst case scenario, but it's, you need to get to the doctor first to figure out what's going on and let them formalize that treatment plan.
Exactly. Let them figure out what's going on and then provide you the the best treatment that you can get from that. And the quicker you get treatment for some of these injuries, the better the outcome. The quicker you recover from that standpoint. If it is a pinched nerve, at least I'm not a doctor, so I don't give medical advice at all, but I've been advised by surgeons, spinal surgeons that I've talked to in depositions, that if you have a pinched nerve, the longer that nerve stays pinched before something is done to help relieve it, the more likely of permanent nerve damage from that. Wow. So those type of things can make a difference in how good of a recovery that you obtain. And my number one goal when representing someone is to help them get the best possible recovery they can have from that standpoint, because a client that has recovered very, very well from their condition is generally going to be happier with the result than someone who does not have a good result. Even though I don't have a good result medically from the condition, even though I don't have any direct control over the medical treatment, if you're still in constant pain 10 years later and you're associating me with your work injury, you're not as happy with me. So from that standpoint, you want to make sure, not just for that reason, because I do care about my clients, I want to make sure my clients are getting the best treatment they can get and getting the best recovery they can get. And then we'll deal with the permanent aspect of their claim and what they're entitled to, whether it's an injury at factory or a work injury somewhere else, a car wreck even. That's the number one goal I have for my clients, is making sure they're getting proper treatment, getting the best treatment. And then when they get as good as they can get, then we'll deal with what they're entitled to under the law at that point.
Speaking of Kentucky law, and this is before we get really deep into this episode, do you want to talk about what's known as the duty to notify? And I know we want them to get proper medical treatment quickly, but they also need to let somebody know, right?
They do. There's a couple of things that occur in a workers' compensation case when you're at a factory or anywhere else and injured on the job. There's a few things that I call threshold issues. These are issues that I have to establish in the claim before you are going to be successful at all in the claim. One of those, and the first one that comes into play, is you have to give due and timely notice of the injury as soon as practical after their work injury. That does not, and I've represented people, a lot of companies, especially in the factory setting, which is what we're kind of specifically talking about today, they will have a company policy that you've got to report an injury within 24 hours of it occurring. And I've had some employers tell the injured worker, you didn't notify us within 24 hours, so it's not covered under workers' comp anymore. We can't submit it to workers' comp. That is not Kentucky law. That's not correct. And when it says as soon as practical, it does not mean absolutely immediately to give notice. Now, the best case scenario is if you have a pop in your low back and you have sudden sharp pain, tell your supervisor about that. You don't have to, even if you don't think you need to go see a doctor right then and you don't go seek medical treatment, at least tell your supervisor about it, because that's all you have to do. As far as notice, you just have to tell somebody above you in the chain of command that the injury occurred. Now, it's got to be in the management chain of command. So if you're at a union shop, telling your union steward does not work. It's got to be in the management chain of command. Now, hopefully your union steward, and most would, they're going to tell you, okay, we need to report this to your supervisor, your foreman, whatever they're called at your place of business. But you need to let somebody in the chain of command know about that injury there. But if you don't give it to them that day, you don't give it to them the next day. There are a lot of times, you lift a box and you feel a pop and a little sharp pain, and then 5 minutes later it's kind of gone away. If you played football, you know what a stinger is, and so it's something kind of like that, and you think it's nothing, and then the next day you get up and you got an ache, and then it just keeps getting worse, and a week later you realize, oh, I need to go see somebody about this. That's not too late to give notice. Giving the notice when you realize you have to seek medical treatment, that it's more than just a temporary strain of a muscle, that's perfectly acceptable in Kentucky to do it that way. Now, so when you realize, okay, I'm having problems from this work injury, and I don't care if it's a week later, a month later, 2 months later, when you realize it, tell the boss, somebody in your chain of command about that injury.
And then tell the provider that, hey, the medical provider, I got hurt at work.
Exactly.
So that it's documented, right?
Yes. When you go to the doctor for that first medical treatment, and every new doctor thereafter, let them know. I was lifting a heavy box at work and had the sudden, I felt a pop and sudden sharp pain, and then it just it went away, but then it kind of gradually kept coming back on. Or just felt a pop, and then the next morning I was aching and it gradually got worse. Whatever the truth is, but make sure you let them know that this occurred at work and how it occurred from that standpoint. Because and even if you haven't told the employer, if you went to the urgent care later that night, but you didn't tell the employer till a couple of weeks later, it helps to establish, okay, this did in fact occur. He's not just having back pain and trying to get it covered under workers' comp. He told the doctor the next day, even though he didn't tell the employer, he told them the next day about it. And it that all comes into helping be successful in that claim.
That makes sense. So we talked about low back injuries, especially in shipping and receiving, those kind of areas where they're picking and twisting, stuff like that. Another common factory injury is if you're doing work overhead.
Yes.
A lot of times you'll end up with shoulder and neck pain.
Correct. I've represented a lot of people who've had shoulder injuries or neck injuries from doing overhead lifting. Putting product up high on a shelf in whatever room it may be in the factory, or having to dump parts overhead into a bin that then the other workers use in assembling the parts. Those type of activities, and I've handled a lot of those. You see that there's I won't mention the company name, but there's one company that I've represented probably 6 or 7 different people who did the exact same job on different shifts over different periods of time that had shoulder injuries because of the way they had that job designed, and I think they finally have figured out, maybe we need to redo how fix it to where they don't have to lift this heavy product up overhead and dump it out into the machine. And so, but also in those type of conditions, especially with the shoulder and or neck injury, you need to pay attention to where your pain is. Because one thing I have noticed in representing people is when you go into the doctor and you're complaining, my right shoulder, I was lifting this heavy product at work and my right shoulder's been bothering me and it's going up into my, up the base neck and all, but, my shoulder's really what's bothering me. And the doctors kind of focus on that at that point, and then they don't look at the neck. And so if you're having, make sure, because if you're having neck pain as well as shoulder pain, tell the doctor, my neck's hurting, my shoulder's hurting. Because if you just say shoulder and then it's kind of radiating up into the trapezius area, then they may not document you're having neck problems as well. And then later on, when the shoulder kind of calms down and you say, well, the shoulder's getting better, but the neck is still bothering me, and they never documented the neck to start with, it can make it much more difficult to get that neck injury covered.
Now the insurance company is arguing that, that was a separate injury and you did that at home somewhere.
Exactly. That was not injured in this. There's no mention in the initial records of a neck pain or anything like that. And so that develops and can be problematic in litigating the case later on. And I've faced that situation in the past 30 years. I've faced that situation fairly frequently where someone has a shoulder and a neck injury. And, if they originally go in, they're complaining of neck pain going down and running down into their arm, and they don't really look at the shoulder as much. You don't run into as big of a problem there because everybody realizes pain's running from the neck down into the arm, so it's traveling through the shoulder. It's more the issues when it's the shoulder is the primary generator to start with, and they don't mention I'm also having ache in the neck, because they think it's coming from the shoulder. Let the doctor know you're having the pain in the neck as well, because it very well may not be the shoulder causing that pain. Probably isn't. It may be something going on with the neck that's causing that. And frankly, you want to know before you undergo any sort of surgery, you may have a problem with your shoulder. And I've had clients, unfortunately, who's had this occur where they did have some problems in their shoulder and in their neck. They did the shoulder surgery, didn't change their symptoms at all, and then they did the neck surgery, and it fixed everything. And if they'd had the neck first, they may not have needed the shoulder surgery, or vice versa. So letting the doctors know, and so they can determine, okay, which one is the pain generator. Let's fix the problem from that. But it also saves down the road. You never mentioned your neck to us. And so we're not going to cover that, or we're not going to cover it until the judge orders us that we have to cover it.
The another topic that comes up, and we've addressed it back in episode 37, was when we're dealing with repetitive motion injuries, repetitive trauma, cumulative trauma type injuries. I do the same thing at work every day, and now suddenly my joints or my back's hurting. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, you see that a lot especially in the assembly line facilities, where the person is doing the exact same job over and over and over again. When I was at Murray State University, I worked at Briggs and Stratton here, that was in Murray then, and operated the punch press, and I was doing the exact same task, more than 1,000 times a night. And when you do the same activity over and over again, you can have what's called or referred to as a repetitive trauma or a cumulative trauma injury. A lot of factories, they have people using air guns and torque wrenches that are, screwing parts together and doing that over and over, and then it's twisting their hand and arm every time they're doing that. And you see that, developing problems in the hands, wrist area, but it can be other areas as well. You can have, we talked a while ago about overhead lifting and affecting the shoulder. You can have a sudden, overhead lifting, a sudden onset of shoulder pain, or you can, if you're doing a job or you're doing overhead lifting of small amounts, maybe something that only weighs 1 or 2 pounds, that's in all likelihood in and of itself not going to cause a tear of the rotator cuff or something, but you do that activity, several hundred times a day, several days in a row, it can wear the shoulder out over time.
Yeah.
And so you can have a wear and tear. Essentially, any joint that's being used repetitively can be subject to a wear and tear or cumulative trauma or repetitive trauma injury, whatever term you like to place on it. It can result in that injury. These are kind of gradual injuries. The person does the job for a long time, doesn't hurt to start with, and then all of a sudden they start noticing problems. And the pain may not start at work. It may be they notice it when they're going to bed, that their hands are going to sleep and tingling and from that. And then, they go into the doctor, and the doctor looks at it and says, well, you got carpal tunnel. And, if you tell the doctor I'm doing this activity where I'm repetitively using my wrist and using these torque wrenches and torque guns all the time, and say, well, yeah, that's definitely contributing to this, to you having the injury. And with a repetitive trauma or cumulative trauma injury, actually the notice requirement's different than what it is for a specific trauma injury. And with repetitive trauma, the statute says you have to give notice within 2 years of when you're advised of the cumulative trauma injury. So you've got a lot longer period of time to give notice for that cumulative trauma injury. Now, best case scenario is when the doctor tells you you have a cumulative trauma injury or repetitive trauma, or that your condition is work-related, is to tell your employer then. You tell them much sooner, even though you have a lot longer period to do that. No sense in waiting. And if you're wanting to get the medical treatment coverage, you got to give them notice. The workers' comp's not going to pay for anything that's not been reported as being work-related.
Well, and I know we've talked about this, and again, in the show notes, I'll put a link back to episode 37. But sometimes the company doctor is going to kind of tell you, well, you're just getting older. It's just, it's just aging. Sometimes it's not. You might want to get a second opinion on that.
That's true, and that brings up something else that I see in a factory setting that I don't see in other types of work injuries, and that is a lot of times in the factory will have a plant nurses station, and if you can go to the plant nurses station, nothing wrong with that. Tell them about how the injury occurred and everything, but frequently in a factory setting, I will have clients who are told, "Well, you've got to go to the company doctor. This is who you've got to go see." In that,
We're doing you a favor. Here's a guy that we're going to recommend.
well, it's not just that they're doing you a favor. Some will say, if you go to somebody else, we won't pay for it. We won't pay for that treatment, nor any treatment they offer for you. We're not going to pay for it. It's not going to be covered as work related unless you go see our bought and paid for
It's
doctor,
not up to them,
company
is it?
doctor. It's not up to them. Under Kentucky law, one of the great benefits of Kentucky law, in my opinion, is that the injured worker gets to choose their medical provider. So, and that is your doctor, that's your physical therapist. If you're ordered to take an MRI, they can't. I've had them try to send my clients 100 miles away to get an MRI when they could get an MRI here in Murray or in Hopkinsville where they live. And they don't get to do that. You get to pick who your medical provider is, your pharmacy that you get your prescriptions from. That's another one they tried to do. And no, you get to pick where you get your medical treatment at. So if you work at a facility that's got a plant nurse or a plant doctor, and they tell you, well, you've got to go see this person. This is who you've got to go see for this injury. That's not the law. I don't care what they say their company policy is, they cannot change Kentucky law in that regard. You can go see who you want to. So if they want to send you to this orthopedic doctor that you don't know anything about and you've had a family member or a spouse that's treated with another orthopedic that you know has got a great reputation and that's who you want to go to, you call that doctor up and go to the one you want to go to. You don't have to go to theirs. And if they give you a problem over that, you call me.
Yep, exactly. And that people don't realize how important that is until they really get into that situation. Jeff, another common issue that happens on a factory floor is you get you slip or you twist and suddenly you banged up a knee or you've really injured a knee. It's fairly common.
It is. People will. If you work in a facility where you have to walk, and in some of them, especially. If you're walking and you got to, you're carrying something and you got to turn and twist and put it somewhere, you can injure your knee easily doing that activity. When you plant your foot and twist that leg, it can result in some injuries to the knee. Knee injuries, like I said earlier, any joint can be part of a wear and tear injury, and knees are certainly part of that. But I'll frequently see when somebody lifts something and just twist instead of moving their feet to place whatever they're lifting and carrying onto a conveyor or something of that nature. And then, knee pops, they've torn a meniscus or torn a ligament or something in their knee from doing that activity. And that's just something that unfortunately occurs. Or a lot of factories, depending on what the product is. When I worked at Briggs and Stratton, they milled parts there, and and the machines that were doing the milling used lubricant on that, and then that would splash everywhere and be on the floor, and people would walk through it, and then even if you worked in that department, you'd get it on your soles of your feet, and you may no longer be in that department, but then all of a sudden you hit something that's not got any kind of tread to it and then slip and fall because you've got that lubricant on the bottom of your shoes from the department you worked in. And you see that way too often, frankly, because unfortunately a lot of plants that I've had cases against, they don't have good control over making sure that lubricant or oil or whatever it is doesn't get outside the station where the work's occurring and lets it get on the floor, and they don't take any steps to protect their employees in that setting.
Right, it's unfortunate. Now, not that those not what we've talked about so far, not that those haven't been serious, but now let's move into some really more serious and sometimes catastrophic type injuries. I mean, obviously, we've done a couple of episodes already on crushes and amputations where maybe you've got a press or something like that, and I mean, those are horrible accidents.
Yes. Yeah. If unfortunately when people work on presses, sometimes they get body parts caught inside that press. It can result in amputations, and sadly, unfortunately, some employers bypass some of the safety devices on the machine when they get the machine in, and then they alter some of the safety devices so that quote unquote, their reasoning is it increases speed or something of that nature, but then that exposes the employee to potentially having a body part caught in that press or that machine. From that standpoint, if you work in a facility that uses forklifts or tow motors, whatever you want to call them, unfortunately, I've had clients that had product that's been set down on their foot. From that, I've had clients that's been struck by tow motors or forklifts when they've been driving and the person wasn't paying attention that was driving the forklift in there. And so you can have serious injuries, and some of them can have very, very catastrophic results.
Well, and that leads me up to head injuries, and this can happen, especially if you've got overhead conveyors or you've got parts moving around, or you fall and you hit your head. I mean, it can be a number of different things that really lead to some type of brain trauma, and luckily, we've done some podcast episodes on this. So again, once again, in the show notes, I'll put links to the full podcast episodes. But you want obviously in a factory setting. There's danger everywhere.
Yes, and again, the forklift and other equipment that's moving through the machine through the plant can strike somebody, knock them to the ground, and cause a head injury. A lot of factories, you have overhead hoist and things of that nature that are running. The people are moving around, and unfortunately, I've had clients where they were looking a different direction. Somebody was moving it, wasn't paying attention, and the buckle on the hoist struck them in the head and caused a significant head injury. Those things occur, and a lot of them shouldn't. And one of the things that can come into play with some of these that we've talked about, the lifting, the repetitive trauma. You won't get into a safety violation, but if you've got a situation sometimes with the forklifts or getting struck in the head by something, it could be that the employer or a coworker has violated a safety statute, a safety regulation, or a safety protocol of the employer, and that can come into play actually to be used to increase the benefits that the injured worker receives if there is a violation of the safety statute by the employer, an OSHA violation. Then an attorney who is familiar with what they're doing can have increased benefits increased by up to 30% for that injured worker because of that.
Wow. And I hate to end on a sad note, but there's also unfortunately the occurrence of workplace fatalities, and that's obviously the most tragic situation. But you've dealt with some of these too.
Yes, I've dealt with these more frequently than I wish I would have. But yes, it's something that occurs too often in Kentucky and in other states as well. But it occurs too often. But there are fatalities that occur in the workplace, and some are immediate. The person unfortunately passes away there at the work site from the injury, and sometimes it could be weeks or months or some even years later because of medical treatment or something of that nature. And you can, in that situation, there are different benefits than the normal workplace injury. Because normally you're looking at temporary total disability, medical, permanent disability benefits, and vocational rehabilitation. In a death situation, there may or may not be medical, depending on how quickly the death was from that standpoint. And then, there's no temporary total after the death. And so you've got benefits in the death situation to surviving spouses and surviving children and others who may be dependent upon the deceased worker. lump sum benefit to the estate to help take care of the funeral expenses and other expenses as well that come into play. So you have a variety of people at that point that have potential claims there that need to be protecting us. And there are certain, like every other case, there's deadlines on getting these claims pursued. So
Right. And when it happens, obviously you're dealing with a whole bunch of other issues. And this isn't top of mind right now, but as the dust tends to clear, I mean, it's time to pick up the phone and probably, especially with the really, really serious injuries, and unfortunately with the fatalities, that you get a lawyer involved. And Jeff, you've been handling workers' comp here in Western Kentucky and actually across the Commonwealth for 30 years. I mean, you've been in a lot of these situations. You've seen a lot of these injuries. You've handled most of them. And it's one of those things that now you have two offices, right?
I do. I have an office in Murray and I have an office in Hopkinsville, but I handle cases all over the Commonwealth, as you mentioned. From that standpoint, I've handled cases from Paducah to Pikeville, Cincinnati area, Northern Kentucky area on this side of Cincinnati. So I've handled cases all over, and I've done personal injury practice, including workers' comp, for more than 30 years now. And sadly, unfortunately, you're probably not going to call me up and talk to me about a situation that I have not experienced and seen and represented someone else that has faced a similar situation as what that you may be facing from that standpoint. And if you do, if you have been injured on the job or have had family members, unfortunately, that may have died as a result of a workplace injury or any type of injury from that standpoint, you can give me a call and I'll be happy to speak with you. And as I mentioned before, the initial consultations are free. So even if you don't hire me, there's no cost for that initial consultation. If you do hire me, the fee's contingent, so I only get paid at the end when I'm successful in the case. But if you want to talk, then you can call my office at 270-753-0053. Or if you're outside of the 270 area code and you want to use 800 number, it's 1-800-844-5108.
Fantastic. Jeff, I really appreciate your time here. I know that these injuries are horrible. Anytime you get injured, it just messes up things. It messes up your ability to get back to work. It messes up the things you like to do when you're not working. And knowing that you're here and that you can take these cases all over the Commonwealth is kind of reassuring. And the fact that you've done it for 3 decades now, you know your stuff.
Yeah, these injuries, unfortunately, are frequently life-altering injuries, and they affect not only the injured person but the family. Even if it's just a physical injury, not a fatality, it still has an effect on the entire family, unfortunately.
Absolutely, it does. Well, Jeff, again, thank you very much for your time. And for our listeners, I appreciate you sticking with us through this episode. Do us a favor. You probably know families and friends who work in factory situations. We'd certainly appreciate it if you'd consider sharing this episode with them on your social media. Just let other people know, here's a lot of information out here. Here's a guy that kind of knows what he's doing, obviously. And they may, unfortunately, need that resource at some time. But, I'd appreciate it if you'd share that out. Well, friends, we'll be back in about 2 weeks. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.